On May 16, 1855, bank officials in Paris opened 3 iron safes. The safes were supposed to contain 12,000 pounds worth of gold bullion, about $4 million in today's money, destined to pay British troops fighting in the Crimean War. The officials unlocked the first safe, then the second, then the third. Inside each one, lead shot. The robbery had taken place somewhere between London and Paris, but where? Nobody could prove anything. Then a woman scorned brought the entire operation crashing down. If heist stories with Victorian-era twists interest you, subscribe now. The mastermind, Edward Agar, was approaching 40 years old in 1855, and he'd been a professional thief since he was 18. But Agar wasn't your typical Victorian criminal. He didn't live in squalor in London slums. He didn't skulk in dark alleys. Instead, he lived in a fashionable house called Cambridge Villa in Shepherd's Bush, one of the nicer areas of London at the time. He dressed well. He had £3,000 in government bonds, a fortune for a working man. To his neighbors, he probably appeared to be a respectable gentleman of independent means. In reality, Agar was one of the best safecrackers in England. He'd spent 10 years abroad, in Australia and America, honing his criminal skills. He'd returned to England in 1853 with money, connections, and expertise in what Victorian criminals called screwsman work, the art of picking locks and opening safes without explosives or brute force. Agar was a craftsman. He didn't blow up safes with dynamite like some crude thug. He studied locks. He learned how they worked. He could make duplicate keys from wax impressions. He could open a Chubb safe, the most secure lock technology of the era, without leaving a scratch. But Agar didn't work alone. He had a partner, a drinking companion and fellow schemer named William Pierce. William Pierce, the inside man. William Pierce was everything Agar wasn't. Where Agar was careful and meticulous, Pierce was loud and flashy. He wore bright suits, gambled heavily, and drank too much. He was the kind of guy everyone noticed in a pub. More importantly, Pierce had worked for the South Eastern Railway, CR, until his gambling and drinking got him fired. But being fired didn't erase what Pierce knew. He knew the railway schedules. He knew which trains carried valuable cargo. He knew the security procedures. And he knew that the SCR regularly transported gold bullion from London to Paris, payment for British troops fighting in the Crimean War. The gold traveled in 3 iron safes, each locked with 2 different Chubb locks. The safes were placed in the guard's van of the train from London Bridge Station to Folkestone. From there, they'd be transferred to a cross-channel steamer to Boulogne, then continue by French train to Paris. The security seemed airtight. The keys to the safes were held by different people: railway staff in London, railway staff in Folkestone, and the captain of the cross-channel steamer. Nobody had access to all the keys. But Pierce had an idea. What if they could get duplicate keys? What if they could open the safes during the journey, replace the gold with lead shot of equal weight, reseal everything, and nobody would know until the safes were opened in Paris? By then, the thieves would be long gone. Pierce brought the idea to Edward Agar, and Agar, with his criminal genius, figured out how to make it work. Building the team. A heist this complex required more than just Agar and Pierce. They needed inside help. First, they recruited William Tester, a railway clerk who worked at London Bridge Station and had access to some of the keys. Tester was the weak link personality-wise, nervous, anxious, prone to mistakes. But he was also perfectly positioned. When repairs were being done to the safes, Tester managed to get brief access to one of the keys and made a wax impression. In his nervousness, Tester screwed up. He made 2 impressions of the same key instead of getting both keys. But it was a start. The second recruit was crucial: James Burgess, a train guard who'd worked for the South Eastern Railway since 1843, 13 years of loyal service. Burgess was married, thrifty, respectable, and well-liked. He was exactly the kind of employee you'd trust with valuable cargo. But Burgess had a problem. Like many railway workers, his wages had been cut as the railway boom faded. Money was tight, and when Pierce approached him with an offer, help with one job, get paid £700, Burgess said yes. His role was simple: make sure the gang's bags got loaded into the guard's van, and looked the other way while Agar did his work. Now, they had their team, but they still needed the second key: the reconnaissance. For months in late 1854 and early 1855, Agar and Pierce conducted reconnaissance. They traveled to Folkestone multiple times, watching the trains, observing the staff, learning the routines. They hung around so much that the Southeastern Railway Police became suspicious and actually warned one of the clerks that two dodgy-looking characters seemed to be casing the operation. But Agar and Pierce persisted. Agar pulled a brilliant move. He sent a package containing £200 worth of gold bullion, his own money, from London to Folkestone, addressed to himself under a false name. Then he went to the Folkestone office to collect it. While the clerk retrieved the package, Agar watched carefully. The clerk went to a cupboard at the back of the room and pulled out a key to open the safe where packages were stored. Now Agar knew where the second key was kept. The following weekend, Agar and Pierce traveled to Dover and walked to Folkestone. They timed their arrival for when the cross-channel steamer was coming in from Boulogne, because that's when both SER staff members would leave the office to meet the boat. Sure enough, when the steamer arrived, the staff left the office and left it unlocked. Pierce slipped inside while Agar kept watch. Pierce grabbed the key from the cupboard, brought it to Agar, who quickly made a wax impression, then returned it. They walked back to Dover and caught a train to London. Now they had impressions of both keys. Making the keys. Over the next few months, Agar and Pierce worked on creating duplicate keys from the wax impressions. This was delicate work. Chubb locks were the cutting-edge security technology of the 1850s. Complex, precise, difficult to pick or duplicate. One tiny error in the duplicate key and it wouldn't work. Agar made rough keys from the impressions, then filed them down, testing them repeatedly until they worked smoothly. In April and May 1855, Agar made 7 or 8 trips on the Folkestone route when Burgess was on duty, testing his keys, timing the journey, figuring out exactly how long he'd have to work once the train was moving. Everything had to be perfect. If the keys didn't work, the whole plan collapsed. If Agar couldn't open the safes fast enough, they'd run out of time. If anyone heard noise from the guard's van, it was over. Agar practiced until he could open the safes silently and quickly, even in the dark, even while the train was rattling along at full speed. By mid-May 1855, they were ready. The robbery. May 15th, 1855. On the evening of May 15th, 1855, 3 iron safes containing gold bullion were loaded onto the London Bridge to Folkestone train. Edward Agar waited outside the station, watching for the signal. James Burgess, the guard, came out of the station, wiped his face with his handkerchief, the prearranged signal, and went back inside. Agar immediately found Pierce. They purchased first-class tickets for the journey to Folkestone. They handed their bags to Burgess, who placed them in the guard's van along with the safes. Then, just before the train was scheduled to depart, Pierce took his seat in a passenger compartment. Agar slipped into the guard's van and hid in the corner, covered by Burgess's overalls. As soon as the train pulled out of London Bridge Station and picked up speed, Agar went to work. He was shocked to discover that only one of the 2 locks on each safe was actually secured. An SER employee later admitted that typically, staff only bothered locking one lock because it seemed secure enough. That carelessness made Agar's job much easier. He unlocked the safes with his duplicate keys, but he didn't open the boxes the normal way, through the front. Instead, Agar used pincers to carefully pull out the rivets holding the iron bands that bound each box together. Then he used wedges on the back of the boxes to pop the lids open without causing obvious damage to the front. Inside, gold bars and American gold eagle coins, worth £12,000. Agar emptied the first box and replaced the gold with bags of lead shot. He carefully resealed the box, hammered the rivets back in place, and replaced the dealer's seals with counterfeit seals that would pass a cursory inspection in dim light. Then he did the same with the second and third boxes. By the time the train reached Red Hill, Agar had successfully emptied all 3 safes. He'd replaced most of the gold with lead shot, though there wasn't quite enough shot to match the weight exactly, so he left the perfect crime. The safes continued their journey from Folkestone to Boulogne by steamer, then by French train to Paris. At every stop, officials checked the seals. Everything looked fine. The weights seemed about right. The safes were still locked. When the safes arrived in Paris on May 16th and were finally opened, the bank officials stared in disbelief at bags of lead shot. Immediately, chaos erupted. Where had the gold been stolen? On English soil or French? The French blamed the English. The English blamed the French. The Southeastern Railway insisted the robbery must have occurred in France. French authorities were adamant it happened in England. Investigations were launched on both sides of the English Channel. Police questioned railway staff, checked records, interviewed anyone who'd had access to the safes. They found nothing. The gang had been too careful. The duplicate keys left no scratches. The resealing job was nearly perfect. The weights had been close enough not to raise alarms until the safes were opened. For 18 months, the Great Gold Robbery remained unsolved. Agar and Pierce melted down most of the gold and sold it off gradually. Burgess got his 700 pounds. Tester got his 600 pounds. Everyone was paid and happy. Edward Agar had pulled off what seemed like the perfect crime. But then he made one crucial mistake. He trusted William Pierce. The betrayal. In September 1855, just 4 months after the robbery, Edward Agar was arrested for an unrelated crime. Someone had passed a forged check for 700 pounds. The fraud was traced back to Agar, and he was brought to trial at the Old Bailey. Agar tried to claim he knew nothing about the fraud, but the evidence was damning. He was found guilty and sentenced to transportation for life. He'd be shipped to Australia as a convict. Before he left, Agar arranged to have 3,000 pounds from his bank account given to his solicitor, with instructions. The money was to go to William Pierce, who would use it to support Agar's common-law wife, Fanny Kay, and their young child. Agar trusted Pierce completely. They were partners. They pulled off the biggest heist in British history together. Of course, Pierce would take care of Fanny and the baby. Agar was sent to Pentonville Prison to await transportation. He wrote letters to Fanny, checking that she and the child were being taken care of. Pierce assured him everything was fine, but Pierce was lying. Around mid-1856, Pierce stopped sending money to Fanny Kay. He kept the 3,000 pounds for himself. Fanny, suddenly desperate and penniless with a child to support, tried to contact Pierce. He ignored her. She went to Agar's solicitor. The solicitor said Pierce had the money and was supposed to be paying her. Fanny Kay realized she'd been betrayed, and she was furious. In her desperation, she went to see John Weatherhead, the governor of Newgate Prison, and she told him everything. In November 1856, a year and a half after the robbery, William Pierce, James Burgess, and William Tester were arrested. William Tester had actually left England and was working as a general manager for Swedish Railways. But he made the mistake of returning to visit relatives, and police grabbed him. The trial. The trial began in January 1857 at the Old Bailey. Edward Agar, still serving his life sentence for the unrelated forgery conviction, was brought from prison to testify against his former accomplices. Fanny Kay also testified, explaining how Pierce had promised to care for her and her child but had betrayed that promise. Agar's testimony was clear, convincing, and damning. He walked the court through every step of the robbery. He explained the planning, the reconnaissance, the key-making, the execution. Railway employees identified Agar as the man they'd seen hanging around Folkestone in the months before the robbery. Investigators had recovered about 2,000 pounds worth of gold, some from Pierce's house, where he'd buried it under the front steps of his pantry. The defense had no real answer. The evidence was overwhelming. Pierce, Tester, and Burgess were all found guilty. They were each sentenced to 14 years of penal transportation to Australia. The aftermath. Edward Agar had already been sentenced to transportation for life, so he served out his sentence in Australia. He never saw England again. William Pierce, James Burgess, and William Tester were shipped to Australian penal colonies to serve their 14-year sentences under harsh conditions. Fanny Kay was placed under police protection during the investigation and trial. The authorities compensated her somewhat for her role in solving the case, though the details aren't clear. The Southeastern Railway, humiliated by the robbery and the revelation of how easily their security had been defeated, made immediate changes. They built special bullion vans with improved safes and better security protocols. They changed their key-holding procedures so that no one person had access to all the information needed to defeat the system. What do you think? Was this the most brilliant Victorian heist? Could Agar have gotten away with it if Pierce hadn't betrayed him? What's your favorite part of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you love a good heist story, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true crime history, and I'll see you in the next one.